Right, stage I forgot before, lubricating the motor. I vaguely remember having this apart to lubricate it when I first got it in the 70s, and you can still see some slight scratches. I used some big pliers or something to take the nuts off. I'm using smooth jaw pliers now. I've got some BA spanners, but these aren't tight. There's only 2 of them. So stick to the pliers. Again, very well built, not like modern stuff where you have to throw it away when it's worn out. It's fully serviceable. It's a spherical sintered bronze bearing bush with a spring finger retainer, and there should be a felt pad around that. Let me just zoom in a bit. Yeah, under that spring, right to the circular area, there should be a big piece of felt. Yes, there is. The idea is that should be soaked in oil, so there's a feed through the porous bronze for a long time, and it gives it a good life. If I remember rightly, looking at the top of it, the shaft is just plain parallel, nothing attached, so that should, yeah, pull straight out. The whole motor rotor just lifts out. There's a bit of rust and stuff in there, but oh, it's too bad. It's just loose muck. Quite a bit of it, but again, we're 70 years old. It's not doing bad. Just give the outside of the rotor a wipe as well. One of the bits I used to wrap the valves when I took those out. And it's not bad, just a trace. There's a bit of rust on the end of the rotor shaft. I'm not sure whether that's worth cleaning or not. There are some 1000 grade braziers somewhere around here. But anyway, no, I'll leave that for now. I can do that from the top if necessary whilst it's running. So with that out, you can see straight through the motor to a similar bearing assembly at the top. As you see in that one, just about make out the white felt through the slots. So I've picked up some oil in the garage. It's a little bit of car engine oil, 5W30 I think it was, but it's not particularly critical. So I can squirt that with a fine tip into the felt, or some of it. It doesn't need a lot. Just for information, these little syringes and tips are incredibly useful for lubrication, or adhesives, numerous other things. They're not hypodermic needles. They are just applicator tips with a flat end and blunt. And the small ones are probably too small to see details of, but hopefully you can see that. It's just a completely blunt flat end. You can get packs like this off eBay, I think this one had about 50 tips in it and 3 big syringes. But the big syringes are more expensive, and also 2 big quarter things. These little ones are sold in bulk. Again, you can get them on eBay. 2mm ones, these. You can get them in various, 2.5. You can get them in various sizes, and they're such as insulin injections originally, or that's what they're intended for. So single use, which means they come in large quantities and very cheap. Just make sure they've got that same tip as the applicator ones, so they take the same mini, same connection, to say, so they take the same tips. I use the largest one. I was pulling oil into this one of the black ones to make it flow easily. I've gone down to a fairly small one now, so I don't accidentally flood the bearings, because I want to keep it under control. Hopefully you can see that's drawing into the felt and being absorbed. Just put a tiny trace into the bore, because the idea is to saturate the whole material rather than just lubricate the inside. That should do. See, I've hardly used any. I don't want it dripping or running anywhere. Just get the excess so it doesn't flood the shaft. Just give that a quick rub out generally whilst I'm there, just getting loose dust. See, the whole motor's rubber mounted as well. I'll just put a tiny amount on the spot on the shaft where I can see it's got the bearing wear mark or polished mark. It's clean. I don't want to put anywhere near the tip that runs on the rubber roller. That won't do it any good. Right, now the same application to felt on that one. I can actually get to the edge of that one, the angle, just a bit direct. It starts to flow back and become visible. That's plenty. Again, you can still see I've actually used very little quantity wise, only a fraction of a milliliter between the two ends, but it still means it's got oil there and it should prevent any undue wear. Again, just a trace on the shaft itself. Look at the original photo, which way around that went. That way. With these motors, there's a lot of motors use a similar design with the spherical bearings, so they ideally self-align to the shaft, which means the overall mechanical alignment is not ultra critical. But as you disassemble them or reassemble them, they tend to twist in the seat slightly, so they may not be in perfect alignment when they go back together. So the thing to do is, after you've had them apart, put them back together again, give the shaft of the motor a gentle tap, just with the back of a screwdriver or something similar. Not enough to cause any damage, nowhere near that force, but just enough to make it rattle in the bearings, and if they're a little bit offline, hopefully bring them back into line. Let's take the idler off again, that needs lubricating as well. Yeah, that's... oh no, it's not bad. It's not fully free. It's slightly stiff. Making sure there's no trace of oil got onto the end that touches the roller. But, just... it's quite a gentle knock from two different angles, just to try and sort the bearings, and you can see it now spins quite freely, hopefully. Yeah, you can see that it's spinning freely, so it should run fine. So the idler can go back on, again with a trace of oil on the bearing. And this is a fixed bush, there's no felt. So although it will hold a tiny amount of oil internally, it's not a lot. And that has got a bit of slop on it, it's a bit of a slightly different shaft size to wear. So it definitely needs lubrication. If the bush is dry, some of that should soak into the pores. It's not gone through to the bottom of it, so we'll take a bit more. It's quite dry. Still not any trace at the bottom of it, even though it's lifted off the shaft. I think it wants just enough on so it gets through onto that base surface without directly applying it. Oops, that's probably too much of that. But yeah, always take it off again. A little bit of cloth is too much. Slowly vanishing, no visible pull anymore, and it's down to the base. Right. Okay. Oh, just a cloth. Alright, just give it a bit of quick dab to get any stray off it, so it's not getting anywhere it shouldn't. No. Again, that idler, the suspension on that needs a trace of lubrication, then not too much. So just put a tiny amount on that, make sure it runs freely. that just runs directly on the metal underneath. So I'll put a trace oil on that. Some of the loading is going to get transferred through to that. Okay. That looks okay. Put the retainer back on. There's a bit of dust build up in there. The whole top surface is a kind of age film on it. Just trying to with it. I think all the screws should still be tight. Just check. It should be ready for a turntable, I think. Centre bearing that again needs a trace of lubrication. So there is a very slight discoloration from surface rust on the spindle, but I don't think it's going to affect it at all, or not in any way that matters. I'll let that wear off on its own, just polish itself again. So just almost break it by standing on the lid. Okay, turntable. This looks to be a solid brass centre rather than sintered, so lubrication is a bit more important on that. Put some oil on the spindle and some in the bush. I don't want to excess, it's going to run everywhere. But I don't want it running dry and wearing excessively. It's nowhere near any other parts that can be affected by oil, so it's not going to. Okay, now I've freed up the idler, it doesn't want to go in. That's it. And that's dragging on the idler a bit on it. So it's obviously in my mind, that's okay. Retaining screw back in. That should now run when it's got power on it. Let me zoom out again. If we can, there we go. The bits of pink are microfiber cloth. I got it stood on for when I had it upside down so I don't scratch the lid. The plastic bench mat has had a lot of use and may have got bits of metal and stuff embedded in it, so I don't was taking chances with that. I've also just broken the clips off this connector. I found a picture online that shows one of these with the connectors in, and you can see that in the original connectors, the right angle ones with the cables coming out the side of the machine, and they have visible retaining pips, top and bottom. I'm guessing there's some kind of spring-loaded friction fit pins or something like that, just like rounded heads. But they did not have the big arms that this connector had, so I don't risk damaging the case by scraping those through it. So that's going to be just a straight friction fit for now. That's it, and the motor starts first time and has a good torque. Right, so the next stage, you're getting a microphone and some kind of earpiece or headphone connection set up. Microphone's not here yet, so I'll have to put it on hold for a day or two until that arrives. But progress is looking good.